Hello, everyone. Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, July the 2nd, 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We are getting started with one more live stream. As usual, if you are here with us, you have a priority to suggest topics of your interest to be discussed live. And while we warm up, while we enter your points of interest in our chat, let's take a look at the news. And the main headline here at UOL is about the tariffs implemented by the United States, and it has caused some trouble for five of the top 10 products exported, like the top 10 products exported by Brazil to the United States. Typically, before the tariffs, many products would have a zero tariff, and now it looks like there is at least a 10% tariff across the board and some special ones depending on the product. So that's what you see in this main headline. There is also an ongoing dispute between President Lula and the Brazilian Congress. President Lula's administration, they tried to implement new taxes related to the remittance of monies from Brazil to other countries. And there was a strong pushback by the Brazilian Congress. And now President Lula is considering seeking help from the Brazilian Supreme Court, which is very closely aligned with President Lula. So, not surprisingly, he's trying to get some help from the Supreme Court to implement the taxes that he wishes to implement. So these are the main headlines. Let's take a look and see if we have any participation in our chat window. We have Ginny. Boa tarde, Luciano. Boa tarde, Ginny. How you doing? I think it has been a while since you last came to our live stream. I hope all is good with you. Let us know if there are any topics of your interest to be discussed, Ginny. And from our backlog of topics and questions, there was this participation from a person interested in applying for the real estate investor visa. But the person was considering buying properties coming from auction. And then, this person said, listen, can I hire you guys to help me buy property through auction, and through for those auction properties apply for the real estate investor visa. And unfortunately, we could not assist the person, and there are some reasons for that. The number one reason is that, particularly in Rio de Janeiro, which was the target market for this person, there is a strong presence of organized crime in the auction or auctioning of real estate properties. So that's typically, the type of stuff we try to stay away from, right? Like whenever there is a high chance of, organized crime or other types of situations we don't want to have our clients involved with, that's something we're going to shy away, very fast. Okay, so that was the first reason. The second reason is whenever you apply for the Brazil real estate investor visa, you actually need to show paperwork that's going to support your application. And there are certain requirements that are not typically clear to applicants, right? And one of these requirements is that money is coming from abroad, meaning you send in the minimum amount, which is typically 1 million reais from abroad to the seller, right? So you're not sending to yourself, you're not sending to a third party. The Brazilian immigration, they need to see your transaction in a very clearly manner, right? And if you're buying through an auction, you're going to be sending this money not to the seller, you would be sending this money to the auctioneer, right? Like whoever is handling the auction, that's who's gonna show up on your remittance. And to make things even more challenging, you're not gonna be able to send the money from abroad to the auction house. You're gonna be sending money probably to yourself first, and then locally from yourself to the auction house, and that's not closely compliant when you see the regulation. The regulation expects you to pay directly to the seller. So, immigration, and I think it does make sense. They want to see everything from a very, they want to see everything very clearly organized in terms of the inflow of money, in terms of the parties participating. And therefore, in our opinion, buying auction properties are maybe a long shot, right? And we know how important it is for our clients to secure what they are looking for. So if they're looking for a permanent residency, we don't want to, take chances. We want to walk them through a proved path. And therefore, no auction properties here at the firm. All right, we have a Faye. Hello, Faye. Hi, sir. How long before should I obtain residence permit before moving to Brazil? I had a call with you being a Portuguese national and planning to move to Brazil by the end of this year. Right. So, Faye, let me know if I got your question right. You want to know how long before moving to Portugal you should start the process of applying to a residence permit, right? So this is going to depend on whether it's like a permanent residency through marriage. And by the way, you're mentioning you schedule a consultation. Thank you, Faye, for scheduling a consultation. Thank you for sponsoring our business. But just remind me, like, was it like a permanent residency? Was it like a digital nomad? Because for a digital nomad residency, for instance, the paperwork is substantially easier to obtain than it is for the permanent residency, and therefore, many of our clients, they actually hire us when they are already in Brazil, right? Like they come to Brazil from the US, for instance, like they see that they like the country and they could stay longer if they want. And then next step is going to be to secure a legal pathway to remain in Brazil. So many clients, they are going to be in Brazil, and we can still help them out through the digital nomad program. Okay. Now, if you're planning to live in Brazil as a permanent resident based on marriage, for instance, then it's a different story. We typically recommend our clients to start their work with us at least a couple of months, before moving here to Brazil. And the reason for that is because many of the documents that they are going to need are much easier to obtain once they are, or, when they are in the United States. For instance, the FBI background check, right? So FBI background check is very easy to obtain if you are physically in the United States. But if you are abroad, that's actually the opposite. It becomes like much more cumbersome. It's going to involve, like a physical form from the FBI that you will need to get your fingerprints on. This card will need to be sent by mail to the FBI in the United States, and additional steps would be required. For instance, the so-called apostille in Washington, D.C., because the FBI is a federal agency. So the compliant apostille is going to be issued in Washington, D.C. only. All right. So that's something for you to consider, Faye. Let me know if that answers your question, okay? And let us know, how are your plans to move to Brazil? Can you remind me where are you planning to stay? Do you have like a target city, a target state? Let us know about your plans. Jeannie is asking if you sell a property that is used for the investor visa and immediately buy a new property that qualifies for the visa, will it affect the visa approval? Right. So, Jeannie, maybe you are asking about the renewal, right? Because if you haven't applied already, it wouldn't make much of a difference. So I'm going to assume you buy a property, you apply for the real estate investor visa, you get it, and then maybe your question is more related to the renewal, right? And for the renewal, at least in our opinion, like, I mean, you shouldn't be selling because the regulation says very clearly that you should keep it the property, right? So the regulation doesn't say, well, as long as you buy some property or as long as you own some property, right? The immigration process, your immigration application, your real estate investor visa is based on a specific property that you bought before and that the regulation says that you should keep it. So there is not much discretionarity in terms of the immigration officer, that they would review, all right, like, you bring in two deeds. One deed shows that you sold the original property. Now there is a second deed showing that you bought something else, right? But if you think it is true, this something else, this other property that you bought, like the immigration will need to review the currency exchange paperwork behind it. They will need to review the title. They will need to review the contract. So I don't think it is reasonable to expect the immigration to redo the entire review process that they did at the first time. Okay, Gene? So in our understanding, no, if you sell the property and you buy another one, this is not going to be compliant as long as the language in the Resolução Normativa 36, regulation number 36, from 2017 and 18 goes, all right? Not compliant. You should keep it the same property. Now, if you don't mind reapplying for the investor visa, and the amounts remain the same, the regulation remains the same, which is not always the case, right? Like in immigration, things, they do change. They do change often, but let's assume everything remains the same. What you could do is like you sell the original property, you buy a new qualifying one, and then you reapply for the real estate investor visa. That could be a possibility as well. All right. Faye, yes, it is a permanent residency being a Portuguese national, right? So there is a specific track, Faye, for Portuguese nationals, indeed. And I know that this specific piece of regulation was in the works. It looks like at least the main regulation was already in place, and then the immigration was trying to get the minutia, procedures in place, because just like in other countries, typically you have a major piece of regulation giving you access to a certain immigration pathway, and then afterwards you have the public administration getting processes in place to implement that particular regulation that was passed, right? So that was the last time I checked, like they were getting this in place. But I also know that we do have a client, potentially more than one client coming from Portugal, who is securing or secured the permanent residency in Brazil just for the fact of being a Portuguese national. Okay, so yes, Faye, and if that's the route that we're talking over here, yes, you're going to need very specific documents, including criminal records. Let's say if you're still living in Portugal, you will need like the criminal records from Portugal with an apostille. You will need like a birth certificate showing your parents' names on it with an apostille. I would recommend you to start working with us something like 45 days before your moving date to Brazil. All right, Faye. Sean, boa tarde. Visiting Maceió now. Please remind me how to get a CPF while you're here. You apply for a long-term visa with you, possibly nomad visa first, but I wanting to be a tax resident, but not wanting, right? I think the idea here, Sean, is that you do not want to be a tax resident until next May, right? So there are different tax triggers for someone to become a tax resident in Brazil. We may discuss the subject down the line, but just talking about the CPF, Sean, if you're gonna apply for a nomad or anything else, we typically apply for the tax ID known as a CPF on your behalf. So pretty much, all our clients, when they are using our immigration services, they are going to have the opportunity of getting the CPF applied on their behalf. Now, the way you're going to do while physical in Brazil, let's say if you want to expedite things and handle by yourself, unfortunately, there is no clear advice on how to do that because there is a gap between what you expect to happen and how things are handled in reality, right? So, in theory, you could apply for a CPF through either Banco do Brasil, Bank of Brazil, right? Which is the official bank from the federal government. You could also apply through the Postal Service, and you could also apply through the Brazilian Revenue Service. So, in theory, you have those three routes to apply for the CPF. However, we don't simply advise on how to do that or not even advise you to pursue that just because it's very common for people to go, for instance, to the postal service, and as soon as they see that you are a foreign citizen, they are not like, how can I say that without being rude? Like, I mean, if you don't speak like fluent Portuguese, they don't want to spend time with you, right? There are no, public employees trained to speak with foreign citizens in English or Spanish, and therefore, whenever like someone who doesn't speak Portuguese shows up, very often, the government employee, they're going to say, you know what, like we don't do it, or the system is down. It's another thing that people tell us to hear from the postal service or like the Bank of Brazil, and even like the Brazilian Revenue Service, right? So you show up, and then it's more a matter of luck if you're going to find someone who's going to be able to communicate with you, and not only that, be interested in assisting you, right? Otherwise, they are just going to come up with an excuse like, you know what, like system is down, or we don't do it over here, or whatever comes to their heads, okay? That's something pretty common, Sean. Now, if you want to take a chance out of those, I think that the Brazilian Revenue Service, they are the ones who cannot, like say the system is down, or typically, right? You would expect them to, not lie about the system being down, but like they are the ones that ultimately are in charge of issuing the CPF. Okay, but there are steps like you're gonna complete a form, you're gonna take a picture of you holding a passport. There are other steps like that, but unfortunately, there is no like a clear path for you to do it online, like it was during the COVID era. Everyone could apply pretty much through an email, and this thing would be issued without any headaches. Now, for most people, when they are abroad, our typical recommendation is that they go to a consulate and have an application done at the consulate, at the Brazilian consulate, naturally, right, in their country of residency. All right, Gene. All right. Ginada Jean. Jean say thank you. You're pretty welcome, Jean. Faye says thank you very much. You're pretty welcome, Faye. How long does it take to get the permanent residency? Can I get the CPF instantly upon arriving? Do I need your service to get the CPF? So very interesting, right? This is just what Sean was asking. So in theory, yes, you could arrive, and on the next day you could go to the Brazilian Revenue Service. Typically, they don't issue on the spot. They make you file a form, ask for a bunch of documents, and then they are gonna say it's in processing. Some departments, it depends on the city as well, right? Like, so the procedure for São Paulo is different from the procedure in other states. But typically, they are going to ask you for something like 20 days to process the application. It's not uncommon for them to ask for additional documents or to say that there was some type of issue in the application. And the reason for that is, the issuance of a CPF tax ID is more like an exception, right? So if you go to a Brazilian Revenue Service, the chances of getting someone in front of you who applied before for a CPF on behalf of foreign citizen is quite low, right? Like typically, whenever you are across the counter, you're going to be dealing with a person who never did that before, right? So they may say, well, I don't know how to do it. The system is, they're not going to tell you, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how to do it. They're going to say the system is down, or you know what, like we are unable to do that right now. Or they may try to do it, okay? And if they try to do it, it may work. And that's why very, very often we see this more like, hit or miss type of reality, right? Like many people, and I'm sure someone from here, like in a live scene could say, well, I went there and I got it in the next day, right? It was no problem at all. And that would be true, and that would be this person's experience, right? And I guarantee that there are going to be many other people who would say, you know what, I went there, I applied, I got a protocol or a proof of application, but guess what? I never got it, right? So again, a hit or a miss type of thing. Matthew Oliveira, support from Frisco, Texas. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate the support. Faye, I heard I cannot buy a SIM card or order food without a CPF. If it takes a long time, how do tourists, residence permit seeker deal with such a situation? Yes, Faye, that's a good point. That's a very good point. How do they deal? They don't, right? They survive, okay? So there are some attempts to flexibilize, to make it more flexible, the requirement for a CPF tax ID. But you are absolutely right. If you don't have a CPF, you don't get a SIM card, right? So if you're coming from the United States, the standard procedure is for you to just keep using whatever lines you have in the US, and you can basically, just use like Verizon, T-Mobile. I'm not sure if T-Mobile, but I know that Verizon, they do offer a roaming service, right? When in Brazil, so you just pay, I think it's $10 or $12 a day, and you can use for as long as you want, as long as you're paying, the 10 to 12 bucks a day. For the apps, like if you're ordering food, yes, you're not going to be able to use most apps, but I guess you would have it to, you could call directly, right? The restaurants, or you could go in person. But again, that's an interesting point, Faye. Like, I mean, I see some services that they starting to offer this option, like, I don't have a CPF because I am a foreign citizen. I'm starting to see that more often. But if there is no such possibility, there is no workaround. Like, you don't get access to the service. And that's why some people, despite the red tape, the aggravation, and the chances of getting in the limbo, they're still gonna try to apply for a CPF by themselves. All right, Faye. Sean, I understand the difficulties in obtaining the CPF and your challenges in advising a path. The consulate is very far and difficult to reach. Faye, you can get a physical scene without a CPF. So that's Sean's experience. You could get a physical SIM without a CPF. I guess maybe depending on the operator, right? Or some of them they may have a special service. They may have a special service for foreign citizens, right? Like I mean, there are some providers that they are going to be working specifically with foreign citizens and may have this as an option. But typically, whenever I myself, when I get an additional SIM card for Brazil for some reason, what is going to happen is that I buy a SIM card, like I could go to a the so-called banca, right? Or there are places in which you're going to buy a SIM card, and they are not going to allow you to validate the SIM card unless you have a CPF. But there are certain, service providers. They provide a service to, for instance, but not the traditional ones. At least as far as I know. All right, Christopher, welcome, Christopher. Boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team for your consistent professionalism and quick responsiveness to questions. I appreciate Christopher. Very happy that you are satisfied. We do our best. For sure, we are not perfect, but we do try very hard, Christopher, to be of help to everyone who needs our services. I really appreciate the kind words, Christopher. Thank you so much. Aaron, welcome, Aaron. Aaron is asking how serious an offense is to enter the restaurants on CPF in iFood to get the order to go through. Enter the restaurants on CPF. So, Aaron, a restaurant should have a different type of tax ID. That would be the CNPJ, right? So in Brazil, tax IDs, they are issued to individuals as the CPF, or they are issued as CNPJs to restaurants. And I think you're mentioning maybe you're using someone else's CPF, right? Or something like this. How serious an offense is, to get the order to go through, right? So we have a regulation in terms of using someone else's credentials and documents. That could be like, criminal activity. And so from a legal perspective, right, like, I mean, it's difficult to advise on doing so. Now, it's very difficult to imagine, right? Like, I mean, public authorities going after you because you're using someone else's CPF, okay? But let me know if that's the scenario you have in mind, Aaron, like you're using, someone else's CPF. Now, again, the restaurants, they don't have a CPF. They have actually the CNPJs, which is a variation, and it does have a different structure in terms of numbers. It has a different structure, for the tax ID used by restaurants. Sean, I got one from Vivo. All right, Sean. So Sean is sharing. Vivo is also a major provider of services. Maybe they have something now for foreign citizens. Sean, let us know. Did you go to the store or did you just buy the SIM card? I'm interested because if you went to the store, it may be a sign that they do have some type of solution specifically to foreign citizens. And that's very helpful information because then Faye, and others just like Faye, they wouldn't need to, keep it roaming at the fee of $12 a day, right? So nice sharing, Sean. Thank you for sharing. Cristina Lembo. Boa tarde, Cristina. It has been a while. I have a question about the investor visa. Could you buy two different properties that add up to 1 million reais to meet the minimum investment in southern Brazil? Christina, yes, you can do so. just having some guarana. I'm sure you guys know about guarana. Very typical, soft drink we have in Brazil. Okay, so let me know who of you have tried guarana before. Okay, this is not advertisement. It's super typical of Brazil, and that's why I'm sharing here. So, Christina, yes, you can combine actually as many properties as you want, right? And this is not like an uncommon request that we have from, like our prospective clients. The only concern that I have, Christina, is that each transaction is a journey, right? Like, I mean, so if you're buying two properties, whenever we're dealing like with prospective clients, we're going to say, listen, if you're buying two properties in the same building from the same seller, for us, it's going to be just like a regular transaction. We're not going to charge you a penny more because we're not doing additional work. Now, if we're dealing with two separate properties, like different buildings from separate sellers, at least from our side, from our works perspective, we're gonna be handling twice, right? We're gonna twice the work. It's gonna be like two properties. We're gonna do two due diligences. We're gonna, have pretty much double the work. And in this case, our fee is gonna increase substantially. Pretty much, we're gonna charge you double what we would charge if you are buying a single property. Okay, but answering your question very specifically, yes, it is fully compliant, and at least as of today, you can buy as many properties as you want. Let's say if you're buying a property for 100,000 reais, it's difficult to find something for that amount. It's just for the sake of, an example. You could buy 10 properties, show that you sent the money in a compliant manner to, the 10 sellers, show that each property was compliant, like urban with, good title and other stuff. And yes, this would be 100% fine, Christina. All right. So there is the concerns. They are not going to be on the immigration side. They're going to be more on the practical side of buying multiple properties. Now, I understand the desire. Again, this is very common in our consultations. Many people will say something like this, Christina, listen, I want to buy two because I can live in one unit and use the second one to generate income, which, by the way, is absolutely fine, right? Whenever you're buying the property for the sake of the real estate investor visa, you don't need to live in the unit. You are welcome to rent the property out. The only thing you cannot do is to sell the property, right? So this is a big no. You bought the property. You're gonna keep this property for as long as you wanna retain your immigration benefits in Brazil, if you will. Aaron, the Iguatemi near Pinheiros with the Louis Vuitton store has a Claro that can sell SIMs to foreigners based on the passport. There you go, Aaron. Another nice sharing. So Sean and Aaron, thank you for sharing. It looks like, that wasn't the case until, I don't know, a few years ago. But it looks like nowadays, just because of the, sheer number of foreign citizens we have in Brazil, the cell phone operators, they are offering specific solutions, right? Specific solutions to foreign citizens. And yes, if you go to a store, typically they're going to have a more, I guess, variations of the SIM cards and the plans, and they could potentially have maybe access to something like, this person doesn't have a CPF because they are a foreign citizen, right? But thank you for sharing, Sean. Christina, thanks so much for the response. You're pretty welcome, Christina. Another follow-up, is there a way to work with a realtor or seller to include future repairs, investment in the house to reach the 1 million reais? All right, let me explain Christina's question. She's basically, considering buying a property. Let's say if you're buying a property for 900,000 reais, guess what? This house is not going to qualify, or an apartment is not going to qualify for the real estate investor visa because the threshold is 1 million reais in most of the country, right? And therefore, what she's suggesting over here is like, is there a way for us to bring stuff into the contract in order for me to pay 1 million reais instead of 900,000 and therefore qualify for the real estate investor visa, right? So in theory, Christina, if this is not in the contract, right? Like in theory, if that's a side arrangement that you have with the seller, that could work. But if you are provisioning in the contract, guess what? The immigration analyst, they would read the contract and say, you know what? I can tell that, if she's buying for 1 million reais, but the seller is promising something on top of of just the sell or just the delivery of the property, I can understand that the property itself is not valued at 1 million reais, right? Because they do read the purchase agreement. And what I saw happening before, and we don't do that at the firm, just to make it clear, what we saw happening before, it was a person, right, trying to follow their route, and they had like a main contract, and then they had a second contract, a contract that they would not show to the Brazilian immigration between the buyer and the seller. So there was a main contract, everything was clean on the main contract, and then they got a secondary contract. And the problem we have with that, is not only, right, that you are actually deceiving the Brazilian immigration, but you are also damaging your position in terms of the transaction. Because if something goes wrong in the future and the seller has those two different contracts, the seller may say, you know what, like the second one was done just to deceive, like the government. And guess what? A judge is not going to make that one enforceable because that was done in a way that is not like, amenable to the Brazilian legal system. I hope that makes sense. I want to say thank you for your participation. Lots of good points today, really good points. I'm happy to see many participants in our live stream. If you haven't liked our live stream so far, please do so. That helps our business, and it does help other people just like you to find our content, and I really appreciate it. All right, Christina knows that's Guaraná, exactly. Muito bom Guaraná. I love Guaraná, and it's so interesting, right? Like Guaraná in the past, you would be just like from this brand over here, that's Guaraná Antarctica, right? So that's the more traditional one. That's the one I used to drink when I was a kid, when I was, since I was in my early ages, I don't know, 5, 6 years old. And nowadays, guess who's like producing Guaraná soda? Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is producing Guaraná under the Fanta, right? Fanta, the Fanta brand. So there is Fanta Guaraná in Brazil, and it just shows how popular Guaraná is. Also interesting, you guys could find the Guaraná in the States very easily. Guess what? Because there are Brazilians pretty much everywhere. And wherever Brazilians go, they are gonna, make sure that someone is selling Guaraná around. Okay, so if you are in the United States, Texas, California, New York, it does not matter. There's gonna be a store, I guarantee. Maybe not in a close range, but somewhere in your state, there are gonna be multiple sellers of Guaraná soda that are imported by naturally Brazilians who import to sell to other Brazilians in the United States. All right. So Sean is complimenting the Vivo store was able to help with a passport. I have asked this question with Vivo and Claro and get different answers depending on the employee knowledge. Many phones don't use physical. Really nice sharing, Sean. And that's exactly what I was trying to convey about the CPF tax ID, right? That's what we see. Like someone goes to get a CPF, it takes them like 30 minutes to get it. Other people, they are gonna, go to two, three different places, and 30 days down the line, they are still knocking head, right? Like meaning that they are unable to get it. So Sean's experience is pretty in line with what we see, right? Sometimes if you find the right person, they say, "Yeah, I know what you're saying. We have this product. Here it is, and we're gonna get it done." If the employee never heard about it, instead of go bug their manager, guess what? They could very well say, well, we don't have, or it's not available, right? Very typical in Brazilian culture, like the person is going to fabricate an alternative reality instead of saying that they don't know, or, like, I mean, that they're too busy, or maybe, they're just too lazy to take care of you, right? They're not going to tell you those things. They're just going to say something else. So you go away and do not represent a burden to that employee. All right, what else? Christina, thanks so much for the response. You're welcome, Christina. Another follow-up question. Is there a way to work with a realtor? All right, so this one, apologies, I already took it. All right. All right, Christopher, if you purchase multiple properties to qualify for the real estate visa, must all of those properties be retained in order to maintain the visa? Yes, Christopher, that's the idea, right? Like, I mean, they want you to, like keep the 1 million reais that you sent to Brazil. They want this money to stay locked in, right? So if you sell one property and keep the other, it's like you're not fully compliant anymore. You would be compliant for one property, but not compliant for the second one, right? So the Brazilian government typically they don't want to redo the analysis. They say, listen, whatever you did that qualified for the real estate investor visa, you should retain. Right? Don't change that. If you change that, I have the possibility of taking away your residency. Right? That's pretty much the language of the regulation. All right, Marlene, thank you for your helpful information. You're welcome, Marlene. Can your company assist a real estate purchase in Brazil for someone from Ethiopia? Is Africa included support with guidance on property acquisitions? Marlene, that's a good question. So typically, right? Typically, we face a lot of challenges when trying to assist people from outside of our specialties. There is someone else, just gonna give an example. I'm not sharing like the person's name, but it is someone from the Middle East, right? Like I'm not gonna say the nationality, and it's very tough, right? Like this first, when you try to get like the visitor visa to come to Brazil to visit the properties, right? And the person could not get the tourist visa. Now he's considering doing like from abroad, meaning he would buy a property without even visiting. That's concerning as well, right? And even if he buys the property and we can initially approve the investor visa in Brazil, the paperwork would still need to be sent, to the embassy or consulate in charge of his jurisdiction, and they would still have a final saying on whether or not he's gonna get the visa, right? And then, another follow-up question, Martin, that I had from this gentleman was, well, if it doesn't work, like, can I sell the property? I said, absolutely, right? The property is for you to sell, but you're gonna be, losing money because it's very easy to buy a property when you have the money. But when you're gonna sell, then sometimes, the property is gonna be seen in the market. You're gonna get anxious. You may need to drop the price for a quicker sell. So very tough situation, right? And one of the questions, additional questions from this gentleman was, well, do I get a refund if it doesn't work, right? And I said, listen, there is no refund by anyone, right? Like, I mean, the sellers of the property, once they sold the property, they have no connection to you anymore, right? Like, you can't ask for a refund. And us, as the service providers, we are not going to provide you a refund for a service that was rendered, right? We rendered the service is gone, right? If it doesn't work, it's just the nature of legal advisory and services, right? Like that's why we're so picky in terms of clients, because we know how stressful or how difficult it is on someone when you buy services and when you don't get what you buy. That's why we actually decline most of the people who seek our services, right? The vast majority of people trying to secure our services, we're not gonna be able to accommodate. Most of the time, we're gonna share like a secondary type of resource, just so we don't say, you know what, like I mean, we cannot help you, and good luck. So instead of doing that, sometimes we do share, another provider, but it's pretty tough to work, Marlene, with people from countries in which immigration to Brazil is difficult from the get go, right? And I would assume, if you allow me, to be very honest, that could be the case for Ethiopia, because typically it is for other countries in Africa, right? Like Brazil, and that's interesting, right? Like nowadays, Brazil is just like the United States, right? Like Brazil, whenever people are coming, they want to see, people with big bucks coming from highly developed countries, right? Like if you're coming from the US, even nowadays, right, there is a need for the e-visa. But as soon as you show that you have a lot of money, that you're coming from the US, that you are a US citizen, guess what? You're very welcome to come. Now, if you're coming from Africa, if you're coming from the Middle East, right, like if you're coming from Asia, then it becomes an uphill battle. And even if we represent you with diligence, it is still very difficult for us to get those things done. All right, Martin. I hope that makes sense. Um, all right. So, Steve, how does insurance work when you purchase a property in Brazil? Condo apartment insurance for the structure and content. So, Steve, typically insurance is cheaper in Brazil. In Brazil, is not really, common for people to pursue insurance for the structure. They're typically seeking insurance for the contents, right? Which is the more typical, I think, home rental insurance in the US. Right? But when you're thinking about the structure, the more comprehensive insurance that you have in the United States, which does cost a boatload of money, this one is not typical in Brazil. However, as far as I know, it does exist, and when available, it is probably cheaper than what you would pay in the United States. Potentially for two reasons. One reason is going to be that the structures in Brazil, they are probably more robust, and that's one reason, right? Like I mean, we don't, most of the structures in Brazil, they don't rely on drywalls, right? And that's one of the reasons. The second one is because workforce in Brazil is substantially cheaper than it is in the United States, right? Like in the United States, something that's so interesting to me, right? Like, I mean, it's very rare for someone to make structural changes to their homes, just because the cost to do a structural change is cost prohibitive, right? Like, I mean, nobody can, go to their, I mean, you can go to your kitchen and change the appliances, change the island in the middle, but you're not going to be opening new wall. You're not going to be raising new walls or making, new entries in your house just because the cost is crazily expensive, right? In Brazil, is the exact opposite, right? You can do a bunch of things because workforce is more abundant, and the costs are never, as high as what you see in the United States. But from the insurance perspective, Steve, like we typically do recommend you, right? Like I mean, to get as much insurance as you can, and to get coverage in case something bad happens. There could be fire. leakages, this type of stuff will very rarely cause a major impact. But there are some areas, particularly in the south of Brazil, in which you have floods. And in this case, there are specific insurance, just like in the US, there is a specific type of insurance to cover that. And yes, but that's something we actually offer within our service. Like when you're using our service to buy properties in Brazil, we're going to actually recommend you, like a specific insurance agent that does like most of the insurance for our clients. Like we try to, bring like our network. So it's not just like the process of assisting with the transaction, but it's also sharing many resources that can help you in your journey. Another very common need, particularly for people securing the real estate investor visa, is like when they need to ship their stuff to Brazil. So we know who the good shippers are, even though it's another journey, right? To bring stuff to Brazil, very often, timeline is going to be longer than expected. They're going to be overstay fees because the port is not going to process your container on time. But at least we give you resources that are not going to take our money and run away, right? So there is always some level of red tape, of bureaucracy, of difficulty when doing things in Brazil. But our purpose, right, like our goal is to give you access to things that are going to work at the end of the day. All right, Christopher, we have a plenty of Guaraná in Miami, but I'm hoping that someday we can get checkmate. All right, there you go, Christopher. Yes, Miami and Florida in general, right, Christopher? So it's not just like Miami, but it's Orlando. And I would say pretty much the entire state of Florida. It's basically overwhelmed by Brazilians, and in Miami, right, and in other cities, Fort Lauderdale, it is so common for you to find like Brazilian restaurants, right? Brazilian restaurants and other typical and typical Brazilian food, being sold, Brazilian food and beverage being sold elsewhere. Checkmate, is it a beer, Christopher? Checkmate, I'm sure it's not like soda. I would guess it's either like beer or a type of tea, right? Mate in Portuguese means a specific type of tea. And I remember there was another brand of beer that was closer to that name. So let us know, is that a beer or a tea? Checkmate. And Sean, please remind me if a pre-construction condo can qualify for real estate visa, and would your firm help with this? Yeah, Sean. Yes, it is. It is actually the minority of our transactions in this space. Most of the clients, they are going to buy something from that's already in the market. But pre-construction or off-plan, right? Off-plan or pre-construction, that's something that typically qualifies. Now, it does qualify with a specific requirement to present the certificate of incorporation from the developer, right? So it does qualify as long as you provide the required paperwork. And something we see like a practical aspect of it is that many developers, they are not going to give you the paperwork, right? We have a transaction in Rio de Janeiro that he actually is causing a lawsuit, and like this person was buying a really high ticket penthouse in Rio de Janeiro, and the real estate agency promised they would update the memorial de incorporação, or the incorporation memorial, to reflect the floor plan for the property. And in the contract, they said, listen, we're going to get this done in 90 days. If it's not done in 90 days, we're going to give your deposit back, right? So 120 days down the line, this thing was not completed. The client said, "Where's my money?" And guess what? Do you think that the real estate agency came to refund the deposit? No. Like, I mean, there is a need for a lawsuit to compel the real estate agency to give the memorial, actually to return the funds because they couldn't get the floor plan updated in the memorial of understanding. So it's not exactly the same thing that you asked, but just to explain the dynamics, that's why I'm sharing about this case. And you can apply if you're buying a pre-construction property. However, sometimes it's difficult for you to get across the developer. So the developer is going to give you the documents that you're going to need for the application, if you will. Right. So that's the challenge. Another challenge or another point of attention, Sean, is that you're going to need to pay the minimum requirement ahead of time, right? So if you're going to buy a property in 5 years and you're buying this property for 1 million reais and you're going to be paying over the course of 5 years, naturally, the Brazilian government is not going to give you anything until you paid off the 1 million reais because they want to see your money first, right? Like that's how things work. You show the money first, the money is paid. That's when you can apply for the real estate investor visa, right? And follow-up question would be naturally, right? Well, what about 5 years down the line? As long as I sent the 1 million reais, can I apply? And then my answer to you is that 5 years down the line, probably something will have changed, right? At least the minimum amount, which has been the same for 8 years now, almost 8 years, it has been the same since forever, right? So if we just updated the 1 million reais to current value, right? If we just taking into consideration inflation, this 1 million reais should be 1.9 million reais and not 1 million reais anymore, right? So if you pay the 1 million reais over the course of 5 years, I don't think you're gonna have a shot at the residency down the line. Okay. All right, Aaron Kushma, can I chat GPT translation of an employment contract be used for a digital nomad renewal? Aaron, we typically do not recommend, right? It's very common for, it was very common because now we kind of give this heads up to our clients ahead of time. We say, listen, like you need like a quality translation. Nowadays, ChatGPT, is getting really close. But if there are, any terms that an immigration analyst would see that are not common in our language, they are going to pick that this was done by machine translation, and they are going to flag this thing as non-compliant, right? So typically, that's something our clients want to avoid. So I would not recommend Aaron, even though I agree. I mean, ChatGPT is getting better by the day, right? Like, I mean, it's just astonishing how good ChatGPT is getting at such things. And I wouldn't be surprised if, like 6 months down the line or 1 year down the line, everybody's going to be using ChatGPT for the translations. All right, Aaron. So interesting question. Steve, thanks. That helps. Welcome, Steve. All right, we have just a couple of minutes left. We're going to have another live stream this coming Sunday. All right, so if Wednesdays are tough days for you, we're going to have another live stream this Sunday at 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We have created the event on our YouTube channel. So if you are concerned about forgetting about the date, about the live stream, you can come to our channel and just click on notify me. And this way, you're going to receive a message once we are starting our live stream on Sunday. And let's take a final question here. All right, Sean, as I mentioned, it's early for me to start a retirement nomad or retirement visa, but having financial planning questions. If I schedule a consultation, is it possible to refer me to a tax professional? Yes, Sean. Yes. So for taxation, if you just need taxation, right? you can send an email to us, send an email to our generic email, info@oliveiralawyers.com. Say, listen, I am a participant in your live streams, and can you give me a referral for a tax advisor, right? And we would probably share a resource for you to discuss. Like they do just like us, they charge for consultation. They actually charge more than we do, even though they don't have an international presence. They charge more than we do. But yes, they do provide very reasonable advisory just for taxation, right? They don't answer any other questions. 100% taxation. Okay, Sean. But if that's what you need, send us an email. Tell us you're watching our live streams, and we're gonna share a referral with you. I want to say thank you again for all the likes that we got today. Very interesting participations. I love when we have lots of participations like we had today. I want to see you again on Sunday, and I wish you a blessed rest of your Wednesday. Bye bye.